like Paula and like all of us actually, organizing and doing the work day to day, change doesn't happen. And sometimes when you feel a little bit despondent because the change isn't happening at a given moment, or the crowd's not big enough at a given moment, we have to remember that all of those leaders of the civil rights movement, before they became leaders of a mass movement, they were leaders of very small movements. Because big movements don't just drop from the sky, they come about as a consequence of all of this day-to-day, rain or shine kind of activism. And then there are moments when the small movements become big movements. And that's what we have to think about with Julian, because I'd say the majority of the people in the world agree with us that Julian Assange should not be in prison because he revealed U.S. war crimes. And that's the only reason he's in prison. Nothing that WikiLeaks published is untrue. Nothing. There's no fake news there. And it wasn't just WikiLeaks. When Julian worked with Chelsea Manning and revealed the criminal murders of journalists and Iraqi civilians in the Iraq war logs, it wasn't just WikiLeaks. The Washington Post published it, and the New York Times, and the Guardian. Well, if he's in jail, why are they not in jail? And if he's in jail, why are they not speaking up to demand that he be out of jail? Because they did exactly what he did, publish materials that are true. And at the time they published them, they were very proud of them. So what happened? What changed? I mean, as the government decided to persecute and prosecute Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, the so-called free press abandoned them. Instead of showing journalistic integrity and courage and basic human decency, they allowed Julian to be taken down, to be incarcerated. And when the United Nations said that his long stay in the Ecuadorian embassy was an example of arbitrary detention, why was that not big news? Arbitrary detention means he's illegally imprisoned. Why is that not big news? So, you know, the free press, so-called, they can talk about this or that difference between this or that Democratic or Republican politician. But when it comes to the war in Iraq, or the invasion of Afghanistan, or the sanctions on Venezuela, or the blockade of Cuba, or any of the issues that are priorities for U.S. imperialism, they close ranks. So we are standing here today in front of the Department of Injustice and demanding on behalf of people who, and we believe we are the majority, that this prosecution and persecution of Julian Assange end, that it be ended, and that if the Department of Justice wants to even pretend to have the name justice in the name of the agency, there can be no other course but then to free Julian Assange. So I'll just end it there. Again, Paula, thank you very much. It is the coldest day of the year, and we don't blame you for it. In fact, we salute you for taking the position that rain or shine, warm or cold, we're going to stand together and demand freedom for Julian Assange. Thank you very much.
Brian Becker, thank you. Very well said, Brian. Thank you very much. And you know, I came here last night. Paula asked me last week, would you like to come down? I said, yeah, of course. I didn't say of course. Let me think about it. 5 minutes later, I said, I'm coming. All right. So I said, do you mind if I'm going to come down here at night? I'm going to do at the Tabard Inn. We were here 4 months ago, and we had a comedy show there called Stand-Ups for Assange. And I said, why don't we invite everybody. It's free. We're going to have one tonight at 7 o'clock at the Tavern Inn. You just show up and say you're part of this, and you're free. You get in. All right, so I got some great comics. I got some great John Kiriakou is going to be speaking, and so is Chip Gibbons going to be speaking. So that's at 7 o'clock at the Tavern Inn. I'll make that announcement at the end. I showed up yesterday from New York, last night from at Union Station, and when I was here before, I saw a stark reminder how bad this city is in terms of the homeless. There were a lot back then, but when I arrived last night walking through Union Station, there were tons of people, nameless, hopeless, sleeping on the ground at Union Station. And I said to myself, if they were to take the money that they're spending on prosecuting this journalist from Australia and put it into the homeless problem in this city, they could solve it instead of spending hundreds of millions of dollars. That's what they're doing, spending hundreds of millions of dollars and leaving all of these people, not just at Union Station, but across Washington, D.C. This place, it's shameful what is happening in this city, and they are ignoring it, and they're putting their money and ensconcing the guy inside what really is the Tower of London. I looked at his a picture of his wife or his fiance this morning, and the 2 kids. How can you look at that? Not only does it affect Julian Assange, look at Stella Morris. Just look at her and those 2 kids being separated from their father. You know, it's just disgusting. This brilliant individual that has shown the light, as Brian said, on the war crimes and the mass surveillance that the DOJ, the DOD, the CIA, National Security Agency, we see it. We want to put Julian Assange out of business and stop committing these crimes and stop spying on us, for Christ's sakes. So I'm looking at that picture, and she's out there every day, like Luci Parsons. Remember Luci Parsons? Yeah. On the corner, her husband, and she had 2 kids. And he was framed in the Haymarket Square fire back bombing in 1886 and executed. Wasn't even there. And she spent the next 30 years proclaiming his innocence on a corner there in Chicago, just like on days like today. It's even colder in Chicago. That is what Stella Morris is doing. So keep that in mind. She's out there like Luci Parsons every day doing what she can. So we got to keep fighting. That inspires me when I see that. You know, you mentioned Tulia, Texas. I want to get this out of the way. I was there. I got a call back this is Germaine, in 2000 from a preacher. Actually, Margaret Kunstler did. She got a letter from a preacher in Tulia, Texas, talking about this drugs thing in a city of 5,000 where 10% of the black population was arrested and put in jail for drug dealing, based on one witness, a witness like the guy that they hired by the name of Ziggy, all right? So we went down there. We spent 3.5 years organized. We made videos. We made a great documentary. Sarah and Emily Kunstler. Bob Herbert came down. We got so much press. And then 3.5 years later, just on the precipice of this thing actually having a good ending, somebody parachuted in and presented herself and said, I'd like to work on one of the briefs. So she worked on one of the briefs. She worked on a habeas brief. And the next thing you know, she's taking credit for everybody getting out. And she used it to get the job here 20 years later. Her name is Vanita Gupta. All right, Vanita Gupta is 3rd in line. She parachuted in to Tulia, Texas, presented herself as this woman that worked at coffee shops to go through law school, get out Fordham or something. No, father is one of the biggest hedge fund operators in the world, in the chemical companies, worth billions of dollars. That's for Julian Assange. All of them, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Reporters Without Borders, and yet this woman parachuted in, got a lot of press, and it's because of that press that she is where she is today. And what they're doing, if they're successful, will snuff out the press if Julian Assange is indeed extradited and sent to a supermax in Colorado. That'll be the end of the press. So we all have something here at stake. This is, as John Pilger said, the end of this fragile ersatz democracy will totally collapse if this were to happen. So that's why we have to continue fighting every day. And that's enough for me right now. Got it out of my system. He is the founder of Rooftop Revolutionaries. It's a hard rock group, would you say? It's a hard rock. She's the one that founded it, and she's the lead singer, and she's the host and writer of Occupy.com, Free Speech TV, syndicated, and shout out. All right, I told you I cannot read. I should have memorized that. But she's here now, and she's terrific. She really is a hardcore activist and a winter soldier. Say hello to Eleanor Goldman.
Hey.
Goldfield. Did I say Goldman?
Goldfield, but you know, whatever. Actually, you know, it's Goldberg because we're outside the DOJ, so if they're going to get my name wrong, I won't end up on their list. So it's Goldberg.
God, oh my God. I'm leaving now.
Randy, leave it on a high note. You'll have to excuse me, I'm not accustomed to notes, but I'm also not accustomed to having a 7-week-old child, so I had to write shit down because my brain is mush at the moment. But thank you for inviting me out from Baby World. It's kind of nice. He's sorry he couldn't be here, but, you know, with all the child labor going on in this country, he's now job searching, so... So interestingly enough, before I do a little spoken word piece, I wanted to get, y'all might already know this, but the DOJ now has a new domestic terrorism unit, which I think is hilarious because they are a domestic terrorism unit. And of course this is evidenced not just by what's going on with Assange, but historically too. They have a long, long, rich history of going after truth seekers, of going after those who demand and facilitate transparency, who demand accountability and human rights and a livable future. They will always go after these people and label them terrorists when they are in fact the terrorists for denying these basic human rights. And WikiLeaks and Assange brought this kind of terrorism to light, and that's why they are the enemies of empire. And that's also why they are the greatest allies of we the people. And I think it's important as an activist to point out what Assange and WikiLeaks to fuel our fight. And that's why it's so important that regardless of how you feel about Assange, that you fight for him, because this information is vital for the fights that we have before us. Not just to fight the empire, but to build an alternative, to build something better. And so I think it's important that we remember not to let ourselves be sidelined by petty character assassinations that the likes of the DOJ will put out there, but to find more reasons to fight together than to fight each other. So this is a piece that I wrote about Assange a few years ago, because fuck, this has been going on for far too long. And Paula asked me to do it today. And the ashes of these mistakes, shredded bits of paper, like confetti at a funeral, someone has to burn. Between the lines like crisscross lies, do you ask the light if it's good? A murdered messenger sent us a message, but how easily, though, it got lost in the din, because didn't he sin? They'll say, he's an arrogant ass, a pig, don't give him a pass. And yet, here he is, a hostage of holy Rome, a rattler of thrones. Either way, his fate we do own, and this leaking truth, staining a future unknown. If you feel like you're drowning, wake up. The argument's shallow, the precedent deep, and the road to perdition is steep and slick. Will you follow their lead? The leaks can't be damned, but the man so easily damned. 'Cause secrets can't be kept, and lies have shelf lives far too long. Here is the empire's swan song, a failing and flailing hegemony, a Machiavellian tragedy, a grotesque dark comedy, an idiocracy. We are the players, and the played. Does this fucking show have to go on? I don't know this man, but I don't want his blood on my hands. As a child of empire, I'm already soaked. Then you can buy me a beer and we can talk about sin. But here and now, come tear down these gallows. because the ashes of these mistakes are choking out the light. Free Assange. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Ms. Goldman. I'm kidding.
I like.
He's with the good side in Venezuela. I think we met at the Venezuela embassy a few years back. 2 years ago, yeah. It was really cold then. All right, so Leo Flores, give him a round of applause.
Thank you to Randy and to Paula, of course, for organizing this, and to everyone who's fighting for Assange on a daily basis. I see you all on Twitter every day. I follow you all on Twitter, and I'm really grateful that you keep pushing. And I'm grateful that people keep raising up the issue of Julian, because it's a total travesty of justice that Julian is in jail.
Oh, there you are. You too.
He's in jail because he published the truth. I mean, that's the long and short of it, right? He's in jail for embarrassing the United States. And one of the interesting things is, you know, that Brian mentioned how eventually the New York Times and the Washington Post, they published some of these videos, they published some of the leaks of WikiLeaks. But they wouldn't have published it, they wouldn't even have looked into these stories until much, much later, had it not been for Julian Assange. And the thing about Julian is that he exposed the U.S. pretty much almost in real time, maybe a couple years delayed in some cases, but it wasn't these cases where we're waiting 20, 40, 50 years for Freedom of Information Act requests to go through, where you learn the truth right after, like long after everyone involved has been dead, long after anyone involved can be prosecuted. We learn the truth in real time, a couple of years after it happened in terms of the collateral murder video. And that collateral murder video was so important, in part because it was published maybe 4 or 5 months after Obama won the Nobel Peace Prize, right? And in that interim, the US government, they tried to deny the video existed. Then they said they had seen it and it was okay, that everyone had followed the rules of engagement, and they got compliant media, members of the media to say the same. And then when we all saw it, we saw that they were lying to us, like they always lie to us about everything that in terms of foreign policy. Everything in general, we have good reason to believe that the US is lying. I mean, all of us live every day under the brutality of this capitalist system. People throughout the global south live feeling the brutality of US imperialism, whether it's bombs or drones or economic warfare. And Julian exposing that is really kind of encouraging to see, because it makes it clear what we're fighting against, right? In a very real way. And that's why they're going after Julian Assange in such a brutal way. Last summer, we were all here, and I know that I remember Gabriel Shipton, his brother, gave a talk at the National Press Club, and he was recounting this tale about how Julian's partner and children were able to visit him at one point. But the guards went to such extreme lengths, they checked the children's mouths to see if they were carrying anything inside their mouths, making the children cry in front of their father, who had already been tortured for how many years? I don't know, for several years by that time. And it's sickening. It's sickening that they're continuing to do that to Julian Assange. And we know that Julian Assange, if he were free right now, he'd still be doing the same thing. He'd be exposing U.S. empire and capitalism and be fighting with the rest of us for a better future. Free Julian Assange.
Thank you. All right. Awesome. Thank you, Leo. Muchas gracias, Leo. Venceremos. See? How's that for my Spanish? I was in Nicaragua in the 80s. My Spanish was so bad they thought that I was a new ambassador from the U.S. Way back then. Well, I usually do my Reagan impression down there. Yes. Okay. Sandinistas have done it again. They invaded Honduras. I have a photograph that bears me out. It's not exactly a photograph, it's a shadowgraph, as you can see. All right. I did that on the Tonight Show. You're right, it's on the Tonight Show in '84. I got kicked off because I said that Jane Kirkpatrick, I said, every time I look at Jane Kirkpatrick, I ask myself, did Eva Braun die in that bunker in 1945? And that was it. Johnny said no more. All right. You're going to have to come to the comedy show tonight because you got a big laugh. All right, so my candidate 1980 for president is here today. Really a remarkable individual. If anybody saw the debates, the one that really did stick out was Marianne Williamson, who you know, she's been a long-time advocate for the poor, for the hungry, for peace. She has had a great idea, the Department of Peace. And I would think that would be such, if you become, no, you should be the head of the Department for Peace. Seriously. Or president. You be president, and then your communications director would be Julian Assange. That would be my dream team there. But you all know Marianne Williamson. She's got a wonderful podcast. I had the honor of being on with her, which, with a whole bunch of people. This is the biggest podcast ever on Assange just a few weeks back. Would you please welcome Marianne Williamson?
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and of course, I agree with everything that has been said so far. And every time we have these kinds of gatherings, whether here in Washington, they've occurred in London, we need them to occur all over this country and in many different places in the world. It's a conversation which must be amplified, and so I'm glad that we're all here to do so. I don't have anything to say that we don't already know, but I think every time that we join together to say these things, we deepen our own understanding and our ability and our willingness to articulate that which needs to be said, so that it becomes a larger and larger issue, and hopefully a larger and larger inconvenience to the people who work in this building. Freedom of the press is obviously as central, as meaningful, as important to our freedom as is anything. And all of us who are gathered here, and all of the people around the world who are making a stand for Julian Assange, realize that the prosecution and the persecution of Julian Assange is not just directed at him. It is directed to all activists and all people who care about freedom of the press. And so for us to draw our lines, what's happening here is that officialdom sees Julian Assange as a line they're choosing to draw. And we're here because Julian Assange is a line that we are choosing to draw. And even though, as is always the case throughout history, whether it was the forces of slavery, whether it was the forces of the institutionalized suppression of women, whether it was the forces of segregation, it has always been true that when huge forces of injustice are backed by power, money, and government authority, these things are only changed when people just like us stand up and say, in the most traditional American way possible, hell no. And I agree with what has already been stated here as well, that the profound eloquence and graciousness of Stella Morris is such a beacon of light, such an example of, I think, sort of womanhood at our best, of refusing to go away, refusing to shut up, but also refusing to in any way deviate from the best and the most gracious that is within her. We must stand as people now, not only for freedom of the press, we must stand for a radical humanitarianism. It's already been mentioned here, the lack of humanitarian values, the extraordinary lack of mercy that is being shown towards Julian Assange and to his family. But there's an even larger lack of humanitarianism, lack of empathy, even lack of sanity, a larger example of sociopathology, and that is the American war machine that ever perpetrated those wars in Iran and Afghanistan to begin with. It's so important that we get the word out there. The Julian Assange case has nothing to do with Hillary's emails. They have been the forces at work here have been so successful in a smear against Julian based on deep disinformation about this case. This case is about torture. This case was about murder. This case was about atrocities. This case was about war crimes. The person who revealed those things is not the criminal. The people who perpetrated those things are the criminals. Yeah, they should not be protected by the people inside this building. Yeah. When you were talking about a Department of Peace, the reason there isn't a Department of Peace is because peace building does not make the corporate profits that making war makes. We must change from a war economy to a peace economy the same way that we must change from a dirty economy to a green economy. But it will only happen if we, just us, those of us who are here, and those who agree with us, and those who are doing the same thing we're doing around the world, continue to have this conversation. And the conversation is meaningless if we're not willing to stand up for Julian Assange. This case is a vortex. This case is a locust. It's all here. It's not only someone who revealed the crimes of the U.S. war machine, but it is someone who is being punished criminally. The punishment is what is criminal here. The prosecution is what is criminal here. The persecution of him is what is criminal here. He is not the criminal. And we are standing up here today because we are defending not only Julian Assange, but we are defending U.S. press freedom, and we are defending not only the right, but I believe the responsibility of people in our generation, as it is the responsibility of Americans in every generation, to make sure that the U.S. military has a moral core. And when, at times such as this, it so clearly does not, it is our responsibility to say so. I hope that all of us here today will leave this place being even more convinced, more committed, more devoted, more articulate, and more willing to say hell no to systems of injustice that absolutely must be pushed back for ourselves in honor of our ancestors and for our descendants. Go, Julian Assange. Thank you.
Marianne Williamson. Are you running again in 2024? In the gray zone, and you can see it by Max Blumenthal from the Gray Zone. He's done so much work. He's one of the greatest writers, investigative journalists around today. Would you please welcome Max Blumenthal?
Yay! Thank you, Randy. And the Adelson investigation, I mean, I owe a lot to Randy. So many of these stories that you see come out unexpectedly about Julian Assange and the plotting against him by the terrorist wing of the corporate state known as the CIA. Randy had a hand in that. He's a force. And there's actually a documentary online about Randy. If you all want to see what a real activist is about, it's called, what, 60 Spins Around the Sun? Go on YouTube, watch 60 Spins Around the Sun, and see what Randy has been doing over the years, even before he began standing up for whistleblowers, because he is a real inspiration to me, as are all of you, being out here in the cold. It's freezing. Yeah, suck it, Al Gore. It's cold. But yeah, it's not a laughing matter. It's not a laughing matter because, I mean, where's the media today? Other than one of my favorite writers, Leonardo Flores. We got my man right here. Al Jazeera. Good. Wow. Okay. So sort of mainstream media. I mean, like 15 years ago they called you terrorist media, but now it's kind of mainstream. My man right here's live streaming with one hand, no glove on. Expect your hand's all red. It's about to come off. I mean, no, these are the real heads out here, the real media. But what I'm talking about is the media that actually feasted off of all of the leaks, that feasted off of WikiLeaks, that relied on WikiLeaks for so many front page stories, which embarrassed the corporate security state that controls this country, that embarrassed the corporate parties that we have as our choices, that upset and infuriated the CIA and left them on an insane revenge mission to poison Julian Assange. That media is directly threatened by the case against Julian Assange, the case to continue to kill Julian Assange, and they are absent. They are not here. This is an act of betrayal by our corporate mainstream media, by the whole media, against the First Amendment that is supposed to protect them. And I always come here and remind people of the time when I actually called up the Washington Post national security reporter and other national security reporters who met with Julian Assange at the Ecuadorian embassy in London and had their devices opened and hacked by CIA assets posing as security guards. I mean, it's all been confirmed. I have photos of their devices open, their phones. Now, can you imagine if Vladimir Putin's FSB did that to U.S. journalists? It would have been front page. None of them said a word. None of them said a word. Ellen Nakashima from the Washington Post did not say a single word about having her devices hacked into by the intelligence agency that she's supposed to cover. Because why? I mean, I can only assume because those are her sources. That's who gets her the stories. So they've sided with Julian Assange's would-be assassins over the First Amendment. That's our media. Then we got Congress. One of the most prominent figures to emerge in the past year or two in this really insane political environment on the Democratic side is a constitutional lawyer, a very esteemed constitutional lawyer in the House named Jamie Raskin. And he's made his name on the January 6th committee, howling about the insurrectionists who all went home at 6 p.m. after a little bit of tear gas was in the air. The insurrectionists, we're still hearing about the insurrectionists. We don't hear about the people in air-conditioned offices who are in Langley and in the death corridor at Northern Virginia who are instrumentalizing insurrections around the world, from Hong Kong to Venezuela to Nicaragua. We don't hear about them, but we always hear about these goofballs who ran up in the Capitol on January 6th when there was mysteriously the police just, I mean, I was there, I was like, where are the cops? Like, Jamie Raskin has made his name off that as a constitutional lawyer. And he's someone who says that he believes in defending democracy and the Constitution. He's the son of someone, Marcus Raskin, who is actually an anti-war activist, very well known in Washington. And has he said a goddamn word about Julian Assange? No. This is the trial of the century for the First Amendment and human rights. And human rights. Because it's a trial about someone who is not an American citizen, who the U.S. regime is trying to extradite here. My body, my choice, shout out. Yeah, I still believe in bodily autonomy. I don't know if y'all do. Anyway, they are trying to extradite someone who is not a U.S. citizen to the United States with the consent of his own government in Five Eyes U.S. vassal state Australia, with the consent of U.S. lapdog transatlantic poodle United Kingdom. You can see how these governments exercise their sovereignty. They don't. They are Five Eyes junior partners, and Julian Assange is collateral damage. His citizenship does not matter because of his political opinions. And it is the same with Alex Saab, a political prisoner right now. He's in federal prison in Florida. He is a Colombian Venezuelan businessman who tried to secure food and housing for his people in Venezuela and has been kidnapped by the U.S. under the same rules that Julian Assange is about to be, could be extradited, under the same imperial mindset. The rules are the rules-based order that Anthony Blinken, or as I call him, Anthony Blinkscree, lays out. He calls it the rules-based order, in which we make the rules, because we're the top mafia dog. And so this is mafia law being applied at someone, against someone who has effectively been stripped of his citizenship, to destroy the First Amendment, to hold the media in this country hostage, and to shred the Constitution. And none of these people who say they're fighting for democracy in Congress are doing anything. And that's why it's up to us. And what are the stakes? The stakes are the life of one of the bravest, maybe the bravest journalist of our time, who has been willing to go to the mat for his principles. Having talked to his family, Julian Assange's family, they understand what the U.S. regime wants to do is have him die in prison. And we don't know how much longer he can last. And so that's why we're out here with urgency to call on the Justice Department and the institutions that have failed in this city to act up and save this person's life, because we don't have that much time left. And thank you again for being out here. You all inspire me to keep doing the work that I'm doing.
Thank you, Max. Thanks, Max. Woo!
Hey.
catch Max's work at Grayzone News. Maybe you'll see him tonight at 7 p.m. We hope to see a lot of you there. Carry this on through the rest of the day in support of Julian Assange. Let's get a good turnout. It's free for everybody here, and just kind of show up and have a good time. Someone had told me that you were going to be here.
Good job, man.
Boy, all the shit you take is...
You better listen, my brother. If you do, you can hear there are voices still calling across the years. They are crying across the ocean. They are crying across the land. And they will, till we all come to understand. None of us are free. None of us are free. None of us are free. If one of us is chained, none of us are free. There are people in darkness. They just can't see the light. If we don't say it's wrong, then that says it's right. We got to feel for each other. Let our brothers know we're here. Got to get the message. Send it out all loud and clear. None of us are free. None of us are free. None of us are free. If one of us is chained, none of us are free. Well, I swear to you, salvation isn't very hard to find. None of us can find it on our own. We got to join together, spirit, heart, and mind, so all the souls who are suffering know they're not alone. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Ooh, ooh, ooh. None of us are free. Can I get a few more oohs? Ooh, ooh, ooh. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Ooh, ooh, ooh. None of us are free. If you just look around you, you're gonna see what I say, that the world is getting smaller each passing day. Now it's time to make some changes. It's time we all realize that the truth is shining right before our eyes. None of us are free. 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 If one of us is chained, none of us are free. It's a single truth we all need to see. None of us are free. One of us is chained. None of us are free. None of us, 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 none of us are free.
Perfect!
Credico!
Luci!
Steve Jones told me about you.
He doesn't like a piano that's not tuned. I don't blame him. But for Julian Assange, you can play any piano, really.
Leaders that Joe Biden continues to support over the protest of tens of thousands of Haitians that have been in the street protesting a dictator. Hillary Clinton was exposed by Julian Assange and WikiLeaks for manipulating the elections in Haiti that brought the current line of dictators into power. Ask the Haitian people, did Trump win the election? They'll say yes, because Joe Biden is supporting the case against Julian Assange that Trump began. This is Trump's fight against Julian Assange,
continued by Joe Biden. And I ask you, in capitalism, do the people, do the working people ever win under this system? No, they don't. It requires a constant struggle, a mobilization to fight the power and to take it down. We call for the immediate release of Julian Assange, my organization, Socialist Action, and the group I belong to in New York, Stand With Assange New York. We call for dropping the charges now and the immediate release of Julian Assange. Stop the torture. Defend free speech. Defend journalism. A free press. And while you're at it, New York Times, expose the CIA plots against Julian Assange and the discussions that were had to assassinate Julian Assange. And you want to throw Julian in a U.S. prison when the CIA discussed killing him, murdering him in the street. Free Julian Assange, free all political prisoners, free Mumia Abu Jamal, free Leonard Peltier, and all political prisoners.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Very nice.
I don't, for the life of me, understand why the Biden administration doesn't just say, look, he's essentially been locked up for 12 years. He's been in solitary confinement for almost all of that time. We declare victory, we drop the charges, and we go home. I don't understand why that hasn't happened. I doubt that it will happen. So in the meantime, it's up to us to keep talking and fighting and get the word out. It's not done yet. We still have the Supreme Court. Fingers crossed. We still have the European Court of Human Rights, and then we might have to bring the fight here. So let's do that. Let's fight.
Woo!
All right.